Hey, 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 how's it going? Hello, hello, hello. Okay. Welcome aboard, guys. Good to see you guys. Hello. All right, Sean, I think we are we are starting. All right. All right. All right, welcome, guys. Good to see you guys filing in the chat. Want to hear some shout outs from various parts of our great big wide world? Where are we hailing from? Can you guys hear me? I just wanted to make sure. Herbert said something about no sound. Are we okay? I guess London says hello. That means you guys can hear me. That's great. Awesome. Yeah, I hail from the Bronx, New York, although I live in Orange County now. So it's been a little bit of a road. And then I kind of took a 23-year detour in Florida. So it's taken a while to get to sunny California. I've been here for 4 years, so. It's always fun. I love this part, Sean, when they're just running in. It just feels like a rushing digital crowd is coming into the room, you know, like they're filing through one little skinny door and it's just like they're running through. Anyway, it's kind of fun. All right. All right. We'll take a moment to get started. Cool. I'm excited. Are you excited, Sean?
I am excited. I'm excited for everyone to see all the cool stuff that we've got planned.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. Well, let me go ahead and switch my thing. There we go. Let's go here, present slides. I'm going to go and get this up. So here we go. Oop, wrong slides. That's mine. There we go. All right. Okay. Well, guys, just getting set up. We're going to get started in just a moment. All right. Thank you so much for being patient. All right. Okay, guys, welcome. Webinar attendees who want to scale the procedural visual effects ladder. If you're searching for industry techniques to exponentially multiply your modeling skill sets, this webinar is for you. My name is Frank Cordero, and I'm the host of today's webinar. For those who don't know me, I'm already a former cleanup animator from Disney back in the Silver Age of animation, former concept and art director from EA, freelance 2D and 3D artist, and currently doing content marketing for CG Master Academy. Today's webinar is going to be an exciting one indeed. We are excited to have our CGMA audience meet procedural environment artist Sean Mcewan, who will be sharing some of his amazing professional insights and experiences in film, animation, television, VFX, using Houdini for procedural modeling. All right, so this is awesome. And anyway, just to kind of give you a little bit, by the way, this webinar is brought to you by CG Master Academy. CG Master Academy is the leader in online digital arts education in art, VFX, games, and now animation. CGMA always strives to offer artists the highest quality education through the most affordable, accessible, and relevant courses in the world. As a team founded by artists, for artists, we're committed to enabling you to become a better artist by learning from the industry's best. All right. And speaking of the industry's best, man, we got someone special here for you guys to learn from. This is Sean Mcewan. He's a procedural environment artist. He is VES nominated procedural environment artist. He's been both a VFX artist and environment artist for both film and animation studios. He's worked on over 25 movies and television shows, and his credits include Shazam, Ad Astra, Spies in Disguise, The Book of Life, and Resident Evil, just to name a few of those amazing credits. All right. How you feeling, by the way, man?
I am feeling good. That picture is a little old now.
And by the way, guys, just going to let you know before we get started, for the first 10 people attending this webinar, we are offering a 5% discount off Sean's procedural modeling and Houdini class only. So if you get a chance to use the offer code, which I put up on the sticky part of the chat today, click on the link for his class and enroll using the offer code provided, which is that funky string of characters that's right after the word provided. Okay. So, but anyway, that is there for you guys who are interested in being a part of that. So, all right. So Sean, before we get started with your presentation, maybe you can just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself. You know, started your passion, school, how you developed the skills, etc. All right. I'm going to let you kind of take over on this part.
Sure. Well, I went to school in Savannah College of Art and Design, graduated in 2011. I started going there for animation. And then when I got there, I realized there's a lot more to the world of animation and film than just animating things, and kind of fell in love with Houdini while I was there, switched my degree to visual effects, and got my first job at Real Effects down in Dallas, Texas, before they moved up. I think they're based in Montreal now. Maybe they're up in Canada somewhere now, I think. But they were down in Dallas at the time. And I was looking for effects work when I first started, because that's basically what Houdini was used for at the time. It still is for the most part. But I was offered a procedural environment role, which was more in tune with what I wanted, because I just liked the procedural aspects of Houdini. So I took that role and was able to be there for a few years. Ended up in Toronto for a few years after that, doing some live action VFX work, and then ended up back in an animation studio doing procedural environment work again, because that was kind of what I realized I really enjoyed doing.
Cool. Excellent. Well, thanks a little bit about sharing a little bit more about yourself. We'd love to see what you have in store. I know that you planned a little bit of a presentation for us today. So without further ado, I want to really give you the time and the elbow room to do that. So I'm going to let you take over on your presentation, because definitely excited. As a modeler myself, who does traditional digital modeling, you know, if anyone who's even thinking about making a move to becoming a procedural modeler, well, this is definitely for you guys. So listen up. All right. Okay, man. It's all yours.
All right. Got my little set of slides here. So hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar for procedural modeling for production in Houdini. Before we dive into everything, I just kind of wanted to go over like what I'm going to be covering over the course of the webinar, just so you know kind of what we're going to be, what to expect here. So first, we're going to meet me. We kind of did that a little bit. I have a little bit planned here, but I know you want to hear more about me, because that's why we're all here. So I'll just kind of cover that a little bit more. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the benefits of proceduralism, kind of a high-level overview and common use cases for it in the industry. Then we're going to take a look at some proceduralism in action. I'm going to walk through some examples in Houdini. We'll actually pull up a file, and we'll look at kind of how we can save some time procedurally generating things that would otherwise be a little cumbersome to do in traditional modeling software. You can kind of see some of the pros of that in a live situation. And then at the end, we'll take a brief look at the class that I teach with CGMA, so you can get a feel for what you'll learn if you decide that you're interested in this. And you can get an idea of what we'll cover over those 6 weeks in the course as well. So first, let's meet me. Here's me. Hi, I'm the instructor. There's an exceptionally scruffy photo of me from last autumn. Have not had many photos taken over the past year for obvious reasons. So yeah, we kind of covered all this, but I graduated at the Bachelor of Fine Arts in Visual Effects 2011. I've been active for about a decade. I've worked on over 26 films and TV shows. Just to kind of hang on me for just one moment more, just because I sometimes, I find it helpful to kind of know the credentials of folks that I'm learning from. So I thought, here, I'll mute this. But this is just a very short 40-second little kind of demonstration of some of my some of my works I've done. So, some live action VFX work, some procedural environment work, creating the flag systems and marigold flowers and building clusters for Book of Life, various, effect shots. Let me take a look at my notes here. Yeah. So, like Frank mentioned, both 3D animation, live action, been in a few different departments, kind of dipped my fingers in a few different pots. The work on Book of Life was the project that I received the VES nomination for. That was for Outstanding Created Environment. My tasks have kind of varied throughout all those roles, but there's always been a focus on Houdini and proceduralism throughout all of that. So that's kind of been where my passion has always lied. Let me go back to the slides.
And before we get continue, I just wanted to let people know if questions come up during the course of the presentation, you can use the Q&A area in the chat and put your questions there. And, if it's relevant to the conversation, we may publish it and answer it. Otherwise, we'll try to have a robust Q&A at the end of his presentation. All right. Keep going, man.
All right. So before we dive into Houdini itself, I wanted to kind of cover that high-level approach to proceduralism so we can kind of understand, if you've never really thought about a procedural workflow, like what are the situations where you might apply that? So to answer that, let's kind of look at some images of some types of things that lend themselves well to proceduralism. So there's a lot of benefits to proceduralism, but at its core, its main strength is its ability to create complex things in a more controllable way than traditional modeling. So a couple of the things on this screen actually are going to be things that we're going to tackle when we open Houdini here in a little bit. So for example, the gears here, if you wanted to do that non-procedurally in a traditional modeling software, probably start with like a cylinder or something. You'd go around, you'd select, manually select the faces you want to extrude and kind of extrude them out. And it's a very linear process. Once you kind of make one step, it builds, the previous step builds on that, and it's more difficult to kind of go back and start from scratch for like another gear. So if you wanted a gear that was a very large gear and a gear that was a very small gear, unless you're doing some scripting or something, you're kind of doing that per piece more likely than not. But with a procedural setup, you kind of set up a single set of rules that would maybe divide up the perimeter of the gear and do every other face as being extruded and things like that. And then you can kind of build a parameter interface to control the number of gears or teeth on the gear, the size of the gear, things like that. And once you've built a setup for a single gear, you now have a setup for any size of gear, and you don't have to go back and change the whole workflow. You just change the parameters on your workflow. Or maybe something like moss, something more lending itself to a natural look. By creating this procedurally, you can just use noise functions to give randomization to how the moss would be created. You could use noise functions to generate like the growth patterns, across the surface of the rocks and the logs and things like that. And so you can use that to kind of naturally grow it. You can also manually paint on there and then add like procedural noise on that painting. So you can kind of combine, proceduralism with by hand controlling of that proceduralism, things like that. And then, if you develop a system that kind of has all this little fur for moss, all you would have to do is just kind of change your noise pattern or repaint where you want it to grow, and it would just automatically generate moss, based on that system you built. Or maybe it's something as simple as a road. With proceduralism, you can kind of create a road using a curve, which you can do in a lot of softwares. But the cool thing about Houdini is you can then go back and you can make modifications to that curve after you've built your whole setup. So if you draw this crazy curve here for a road, I could go back here and say, like, actually, you know what? I kind of wish that instead of curving over to the right, it just went straight up here like this. You can go back and just change your original curve, and everything that you've generated after the fact will automatically update to that new alignment of that curve. And that, if that doesn't super make sense without seeing it, that's another thing that we're going to take a look at here in a little bit. Proceduralism also allows you to create a large quantity of items that share similar characteristics, but have some slight variation, like, the repetition of stairs on a staircase, or, something like this, where you could take a single, little candle and kind of maybe change its orientation, or maybe, maybe you are creating a single little archway here, but you're kind of changing like its its size, or maybe you're adding different amounts of like damage to it or something like that. You can kind of create a single setup that then just slightly modifies it without needing to create an individual, archway per piece that you're copying there. It can also be used to create complex patterns that are duplicated and repeated here. Man-made environments, such as architecture, often consist of repeated structures and supports. Seats and beams, staircases, windows, doors, planks, windows, cables, bridges, lend themselves very well to proceduralism because you could change the height or the droop of the bridge or the length of the bridge, things like that, and your bridge would kind of automatically be rebuilt. And on a larger scale, the foundational structures of buildings and skyscrapers and roads follow similar rules in how they should all be created with a certain degree of variation between all of them. So entire cities can be generated procedurally by just rule sets of kind of how buildings should be placed and kind of what are the rules of, the sizes and amount of windows and things on each building. You can also see the power of proceduralism in recreating nature. Repetitions, patterns, rule sets are everywhere in nature. It can be used to generate rocky and mountainous surfaces from noise patterns that would otherwise be tedious and time-consuming to create by hand. Cool. So now let's dive into seeing some procedural stuff, and I'm going to start that with how any good demonstration of Houdini would start with a demonstration in Maya. So for people who aren't super used to proceduralism, I thought it'd be good to see maybe a side-by-side of kind of how something would play out in Maya versus how it would play out in Houdini. So rather than opening Maya and doing that myself, this is a video online. This is not my video. It's a video from ARTV on YouTube. They have just a nice little tutorial on how to model a gear. And we don't need to watch the whole thing. It's 8 minutes long. I'm just going to kind of skip through it so we can kind of get an idea of if you were to do this task in a traditional modeling software. Probably drop down a cylinder, right? You go around, let's see, if you want to bevel it out or you want to carve out a hole on the inside, they're taking out the interfaces, they're bridging it. And then to get to the actual teeth part of it, they're going to go in and, they're going to control their number of divisions and sorry, they're shaping the inside there. Okay, yeah. So here, they're choosing the size of the inside of their hole. And then once they have that the way they like it, they're going to go around the edge here and kind of manually select each of the faces that they want to extrude out into those teeth. So they extrude those out. And this is probably, very familiar for everyone who's comfortable with Maya. But again, good to see because we're going to see how we can do this a bit more easily in something like Houdini. Then you extrude all those out and maybe set a little inset on them. And then you've got your basic gear, right? Let's say that's all we want to create. So let's take a look at how we would do that in Houdini now. So I'm going to share my screen. So let me make this full screen so we can, here we go. Okay. So can we see that, Frank? Can you see my?
It's coming up now. There you go.
Cool.
Oh, there you go.
All right.
Cool.
So let's say that we want to do basically that same shape, right? When I hit my tab menu, it comes up on my other screen, unfortunately. So normally what I'm doing here is I'm hitting tab in this space right here. And normally it would bring up like a kind of drop down menu of options to choose nodes from. That doesn't seem to be popping up right now. So I'm just going to drop nodes. But if you get comfortable with Houdini, you'll understand pretty quickly what's happening there. So I'm going to drop down a circle. I can, Houdini has a lot of, you know what, Frank, sorry, one second. I'm going to pause this. I'm going to switch the screens I'm sharing so that,
sure, no problem.
none of the drop down menus are working either. So let me,
okay, no problem.
Yeah, I just want to make sure everyone can follow along with what's happening.
Yeah. And while you're doing that, I'm going to go check the Q&A just to see if there are any other questions that might be populating right now. Christian has got a question. I'll just publish it. What sort of experience with Houdini should we have for the class? So
that's a good question. So for the class, we don't assume a deep understanding of Houdini. You don't need to necessarily know a whole lot, but we do assume at least familiarity with kind of navigating the interface, understanding maybe a base level understanding of like the different contexts, because there's kind of, you know, this drop down menu has a few things. You don't need to understand all of them, but at least understanding that they're there and that they're different things and things like that. We do touch a little bit, like we use expressions and vex a fair amount, not to the extent where it's like overwhelming. We create everything from scratch with vex. So if you're not super comfortable with vex and expressions, that's okay. But if you've never been exposed to them at all, it might be a little overwhelming. We have, that being said, we do get a pretty wide variety of people in the class. Sometimes people very experienced come in just wanting to learn new techniques and stuff. Sometimes people with basically no experience come in. And if you're the type of person who just likes to get thrown in the deep end, then maybe you'd be fine. But I would recommend at least kind of having opened up Houdini, maybe done some like very basic, like, hey, here's what Houdini is, kind of the main methodology behind how it works, how to navigate the interface, things like that.
All right, cool. Thank you for answering that. Let's see this gear demonstration. Were you able to resolve the display?
Yeah, so everyone should be able to, yeah. So this little tab here, I just want to make sure, because otherwise all the parameter changes and stuff wouldn't show up either. So I'm just going to drop down a circle here using this tab menu. And then Houdini kind of gives you built-in parameter interfaces. Houdini, or Maya kind of has those too. I think in the outliner you can kind of go in, but this, you can go back. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah,
I was going to say they do for the initial stating of different parts of the shape. They've also added some new bells and whistles in the last couple of years for a specific gear primitive. That's is about as enlightened as they've gotten.
All right. Well, yeah, I will say I have not been in Maya in a while, so take all of my "this is the way Maya" stuff comments work. With a grain of salt. So just more the main principle of it, I suppose.
And I'd credit Houdini for actually pushing that a little bit more in terms of the whole concept of the fact that they need a little bit more of that kind of workflow in their stuff, which has been sorely lacking for years. So, and Houdini's been doing it in spades. So keep going, man.
All right. So I'm going to put down a circle here, and then I can just put down an extrude node, a poly extrude is what it's called. And this just by default will extrude along its face, right? And so a lot of this is going to seem, very similar to the interface that you're, or kind of the types of things that you're used to doing in Maya probably. But here at this point is where we're going to deviate a little bit. So at this point, you would, we want to say like, I want every other one of these to be extruded, right? But what we can do is set up a procedural group that is automatically updated no matter how many sides we have. So when I did this extrude, there's an option on here to create a group out of those side faces. So I'm going to toggle that side group. I'll just name it side so it's shorter. And so if I color that red, we'll be able to see it just kind of only added in those. Whoops, there we go. The side faces, right? And so I want to now say out of all of those, only keep every other one. So there's an easy node for that. Decide which one I want to use. I'm going to, let me try this. I used a different node in my example, but I think this one might be a little bit easier to understand. So there's a node called group by range. I can tell it to select, let's see, every other node here. Let me just make sure this is doing what I want it to. No, I'm going to do it the way I did it in my example. Don't go off script, Sean. All right. All right, this is one of the interesting things about Houdini is there are often multiple ways to solve one problem. And the reason I was wanting to use that node instead is because I actually do rely on a little vex expression here, and so you don't necessarily need this vex expression, but it's just so once you kind of start doing that, it's kind of how you do a lot of things. But I'm just going to use this little thing where I get the current primitive number and I do modulo 2, which basically says if you divide it by 2 and it doesn't have any remainder, then do something with those. And I'm going to say, remove that from the existing group. And now that maybe that was working in my other one, actually. Now if I color these, let me make sure. Oh, it's because it's, there we go. Maybe that was the same problem I made in the other one. Here we go. So now we're at the point where I am automatically grouping every other primitive on there, right? And what's cool about this is if I go and I change this, it's automatically always going to group just every other primitive. So now I can drop down another poly extrude. And I can extrude that group as my input there. Like that. And then you have, you know, local controls to kind of scale it down if you want to, something like that. And then if we want to kind of smooth it out a little bit, you can do something where like, you know, maybe I want all of these hard edges to be beveled. We can procedurally group all of the hard edges. So I'm going to put down a group node and I'm going to tell it edges. I'll call this corners. And I can tell it to group by like the angle of the edge of the faces that create the edge. So I can say, you know, if it's between, you know, maybe like 70 and 90 or something like that. Is this, there we go. I don't necessarily, there we go. Let's get just the outer edges. So you can see as I kind of adjust these sliders, it lets me control what gets selected. And let's say I want to bevel all of that. And if I put down a poly bevel node and have it automatically filled that in because I had them selected, but I can tell it to bevel those corners and we can start to, you know, soften up edges there.
I'd be painstakingly in Maya selecting every edge to bevel those.
Yeah. So. And what's cool again about this is at any point you can go and you can modify the number of teeth. You can change the scale of your source points. You can change the, on this one, no, wait, on, normally I'd be naming all these nodes as I go along so that I could keep track of what's what. You can change like the size of your teeth that's being created. And then if, you know, I want to carve a hole in there, I could put down like maybe just, you know, simplest way would probably be put down a tube, give it some end caps, make it really tall, and then just kind of boolean them out. And then you can do another thing after this step if you want to kind of bevel out this boolean, but let's just do this for now. So that's probably going to be too big because I need to change. There we go. You know, I've got a hole cut in it. I could do another, you know, procedural grouping of that edge, bevel that so it's softer on the inside. I'll just copy and paste this even. Anything with the hard edge. There we go. Get smoothed out again. I can add more divisions to that. Cool. So now we've got something that's, you know, pretty darn similar to what we had before. And something that's cool about this too is if I know that this is something I want to use all the time, I can create a little control node for it. So there's just this node called a Null Node. It's basically just nothing. And you can edit the parameter interface of it, which means you can kind of customize the parameters that pop up there. And I'm going to put down an integer called number of teeth. And then I can link that to any other parameter. So I copied the parameter, then I can go over here. I'm going to paste relative reference. It's set to 0 right now. So I need to make sure there's actually teeth. And then since for every tooth I want, I also need another face that does not have a tooth, I'm going to go ahead and just multiply that by 2. So now I'm actually getting the number that I'm setting here. So 4 gets me 4. But so now I've got this on here. I could then, you know, go over here and add all of the relevant controls that I think I would use here. So I can go on my circle. I can set, you know, the scale of, oh, I need to untoggle that. There we go. I can set the, you know, the base scale of it. I can set the scale of the inner circle. So I'll call this like outer scale. And this is the name that appears to the user. So I'm gonna give it a prettier name. Outer scale, inner scale. And then you could, you know, you could even add all of those like bevel controls on there. Maybe let's just add one more thing on there. Let's add the like the length of the tooth extrusion. So now directly from this single interface, I can go here. I can control how many teeth I have on this gear. I can control that outer scale. I can control that inner scale. I can control the length of those teeth. And so if you need to create 50 different gears, you only need to build this setup once, and then you're just controlling your build here.
Mm-hmm.
Next, I want to take a look at how we might build like a little road setup, because this is kind of cool because we can kind of scale a few things on it. And with this, we're going to take a look at a couple of simple things and then a couple of slightly more advanced things as well. So I'm going to put down another top level node here to work in. Just make sure I'm hiding everything else. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by just going to put down a grid that is just going to kind of be my working ground plane here. I'm going to make sure I have some space to work in. I'll just give it, I don't really need extra resolution, but we'll just get it so it looks nice for efficiency here. And then there is a node called the draw curve node here. And that allows me to kind of interactively on either an axis or on my input geometry, just draw a curve. So if this is my my terrain, I can just say like, I want the road to be there, right? It draws a curve. It draws it a little, you know, it kind of didn't quite get to the edge there. Let me redraw that. There we go. You can see the sampling is kind of all over the place. So I'm going to drop down a resample node just to kind of get that a little bit nicer, something like that.
Well, that's so nice.
Yep. And then I can also put down a smooth node to kind of, even if that's not quite smooth enough, I can smooth out that curve. And then, all right, let me, so next, let's make a road out of this to start. So I'm going to just do the simplest implementation of this, which I'm just going to put down this node that's called a sweep node. And I'm going to tell it to give me a ribbon. And I can now kind of, you know, set how wide I want it to be, how many visions I have in there. And this will, with certain nodes in Houdini, you get UVs automatically. So for the sweep node specifically, it'll kind of auto build UVs along this node. Yeah,
that's like the that's like the equivalent of the extrude along a path in Maya, but way better.
Yeah, so we have this. So let's see. You'll be able to speak a little bit better to Maya. Let's plug this in, and then let's decide that we want to change this road, like I was mentioning earlier. So if this is our road, I'm gonna just, so it's coplanar with the the ground plane right now. So I'm just going to shift it up ever so slightly. Probably we'd actually, you know, cut out a space for it in the ground plane, or maybe just resting very ever so slightly on top is fine. Because if you built like a curb on the side, that would probably solve the problem too. We're just going to do it this way.
Sure.
So let's say that I have this curve and I want to kind of go back and modify it. So this draws it as a poly curve. It's going to be a bit easier to modify this as a NURBS curve. Okay, it's doing that because of my viewport settings here. Let me, yeah, there we go. So let's go up to our curve again. I'm actually going to resample this down even more so that we can convert it to a NURBS curve, which will be easier to then kind of do some post modifications on. So we're going to do that, and then I'm going to need one more because it needs to be a poly curve when it goes through these whole operations. But this gives me a point kind of in the middle here. So I'm going a little bit off book here, but this will just be an interesting thing to see. So if I go down here and visualize this, and then we kind of go up to this node, or actually maybe I'll go the other way around like that so we can see our points a little bit better. So now I can go here and I can select any of these points, kind of shift them around, and we can see that that road just kind of automatically gets rebuilt based on however we decide to reposition this curve here.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say we like that. Let's add a little bit of extra stuff to this road. Let's say that we want some street lights along the edge of it. So this is something that we can kind of automatically populate based on the curve that we used to build our road as well. So first, I'm going to just build a simple little street light. Make sure I've got my pulled up here. So we're just going to do a very, very simple version of this. But we'll do a little bit of procedural linking so you can kind of see some of the power that we might start to use. I'm going to drop down a tube. It's just going to be like the pole for our street light. And I'm going to set that to be about that tall. My scale is way off here. We're working very small, but I just kind of picked a small ground plane to work with. I'm going to make my radius really small here. So we've got a pole. I want this to always grow up out of the origin here. So it always starts from the origin. So I'm just going to set its center to be half of its height so that no matter how tall I make it, it'll always kind of sprout up from the origin there. And then we'll set it to a polygon rather than a primitive. So that's going to be the base of our pole. Then we're going to put down another pole or another tube that's going to kind of be the smaller pole that the light hangs off of. So let's put down another one of those. You'll see if you're not familiar with Houdini, it's a node-based workflow, right? So every time I'm putting something down, I'm dropping a node, and I can kind of go and access any other node throughout the network. I can merge things together at various points. I can keep them separate from each other if I want to. There's a lot of it's a little overwhelming if you're not used to it, but it's very powerful once you kind of wrap your head around it. So I'm actually going to start this the same way. So I've got everything linked. So I'm just going to copy and paste that there. And I'm going to change this to be a little bit smaller and a little bit shorter. And I'm going to give it some extra rows here. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to transform this up and rotate it so it's kind of sticking out of this pole. So first I'm going to put down a merge just so I can kind of merge the two of these together. And then I'm going to drop down a transform in between that new tube that we created and that merge. And I can kind of rotate this out and then start to shift it up like that. But one thing that's kind of cool, let's say I always want it to be, you know, like a certain portion of the height up this tube, right? So like if I go back here and I adjust this height, that doesn't move at all. One thing I can do, again, just like we looked at earlier with that parameter linking, I can copy this parameter and I can set it to be the Y translate of this value. And I don't want it to be all the way at the top. Let's say I always want it to be like 90% of the way up, or maybe I always want it to be, like 0.1 units down from the top of it or something. And now whenever I adjust that height, that kind of just travels with it. And I don't want this to be perfectly straight, so I'm going to add a little bit of a bend on here. And I'm going to do that before we translate it. So I'm going to put down a bend. And let's visualize this here. So what I'm going to do is I want my up vector to be, I'm going to set a couple of settings here to get it to be the way I want it to. And then the capture direction is going to be up. And I'm going to have this automatically. So the bend lets you kind of set a region here that will like deform whatever you're piping in there. You can see by default, the deform region is set to just a single unit. So it's much larger than what I need. This is another thing I can procedurally link to just the height of this. And if this is something, if you're unfamiliar with Houdini and this is just completely foreign to you, then the specifics of this don't matter. What's cool is this kind of thing. As you can just see, like you can go in here and you can add a bend on there. And you can control that with a slider. So this is something, again, you could kind of create an interface for. So now if I go back over here and, oops, I bent that the wrong way. Something like this. I can start to bend, that little bit of that extrusion from that street light. I can control where that bend starts by kind of changing where the capture region starts. So maybe I want something like that. It's kind of nice. And then I just want to add a little bit of a kind of a squashed sphere at the end here to kind of finish out my streetlight. So I'm going to put down a sphere, and I want this to be fully procedural too. Let's say that just, I want this to be something that I can reuse, and I can completely, change these parameters, and everything will kind of automatically be linked together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a sphere. I'm going to set it to be a polygon mesh, change my settings a little bit here, something like that. Scale it down so it matches that tiny scale of the others. This is we'll pretend this is a little train set diorama or something, so it's very small. I don't need as much resolution, something like that's fine. What I can do is if you have a point that exists somewhere, so I can create just like a point here. If you have a point that exists somewhere in Houdini, like this, you can use this node called copy to points. And it will copy this sphere to that point. So even though my sphere is here, since my point is up here, this will kind of copy that up there. But I want that point to be automatically created based on this, this poll I made. So what I'm going to do is, if I look at my primitive numbers on here, I can see that that last primitive is always primitive 0. No matter what I do here, that's always going to be the primitive 0 is going to be the one kind of at the bottom of it. So I'm going to just delete everything except that. Primitive 0, delete non-selected. And then I can use this node called extract centroid, and I can get just the center point of that that primitive, and then I can use that to copy my sphere to. And so now that automatically gets copied up to wherever I put my the end of my kind of extrusion of this lamppost. I might shift it down a little bit so that I have a little bit of kind of overhang, maybe something like that. But if I go back here and I kind of change this bend, you can see it'll kind of follow it. Right? Maybe I want it to be out a little bit as well. Anyway, let's say we like that as our lamppost. Very simple setup, but you can kind of see how you can start to procedurally link things together. Now let's kind of go back to our road, and let's automatically populate street lamps along the side of it. So we actually already have a curve, right, that we drew up here. Let's pick it after it was all resampled and everything, so we make sure it's matching. And what I want to do is I want to shift this curve so that it's over to the edge of the road. So I want another curve. I want this curve to kind of match, the edge of this road that we made. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to do a couple things really quick. These are the kind of things that we would learn over the course of the class, but I am going to use attributes to kind of figure out the orientation of this curve and then move points using those attributes. So I'm going to put down this node called orientation along curve. So attributes are, a really powerful part of Houdini. They kind of carry like data about the points and primitives and everything that you're modifying. And they really are really powerful for creating like procedural workflows for things. So one thing, so I'm adding normals on here using this. That's one big flag that when people move over to Houdini from Maya, normals don't operate the same way in Houdini as they do in other software. Like normals are kind of arbitrary. They're kind of basically a point vector that you can use to define kind of whatever you want. So if you're hearing that this is a point normal and you're like, that doesn't make sense, that's not how normals work, technically you're right, but Houdini doesn't care. So I'm going to just use this. You can kind of choose which, so what this orientation along curve does is it looks at like the way the curve is facing and then figures out, it sets basically like 3 axes. It kind of does one like pointing the direction of the curve, pointing what it assumes is the up of the curve, and then pointing out from the curve. So I want to get the one that's pointing out from the curve. And so here, let me make my point normals longer so you can see it. There we go. So now you can see I've got a vector that is pointing kind of to the side of the curve and follows the flow of the curve. And then I can use this node called peak, which just moves points along their normal. So what we're visualizing here, if this is a little confusing, we're visualizing the curve, and then I have the road templated. So this is actually what I'm working in, but you can see that you can, there's a couple flags in Houdini, and this is all stuff that's kind of like basic intro to Houdini stuff. So if you haven't dabbled in Houdini, but you're interested, when you kind of start to learn the interface, this will all become apparent pretty quickly. But you can see you can template, which basically like wireframes something, even though it's not what you're directly working on. So I'm leaving that road templated so we can see kind of what we want it to be, what we want to be working around, but we're actually dealing with this curve right now. So I put down a peak node, and a peak node just shifts things along their normals, right? Like that, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to, again, link some parameters, and I'm going to link the width of this road that I'm creating to the amount that is getting shifted there, like that. And it's actually doing the full width, so I can divide it by 2 if I want it to be right on the edge like that. And then I can put down, in this kind of situation, I'd probably put down 1 peak node, so it's procedurally going to the edge of the road. And then I would put down another peak node to kind of give myself a control to like offset it a little bit manually. So now I've got those points. I'm going to recalculate the normals, because normals are, we're going to be using that copy to points node again. And the copy to node copy to points node, sorry, the copy to points node relies on normals for how things are oriented. So I'm going to put down another normal node and just reverse them actually, so that everything's facing in, because that's the direction that we want our street lines to be facing. And then I'm going to put down another copy to points. And we can see that things are kind of automatically populated along the edge. I can drop another resample in between this to resample the number of points on that curve and change the density of those street lamps. And then just like before, if we go up here and we kind of change the shape of our curve. I shouldn't go up in Y though. If I go up in Y, it's going to throw it off. But if we kind of change the shape of our curve, we'll see that all those street lamps are just automatically populated along the edge of it.
It seems like the investment in time and the front loading of the functionality and the options that you can give yourself is pretty phenomenal. So it's almost like where the time goes in modeling is actually creating options or future options. It seems to like favor like a faster iteration workflow, like down the road.
That's something that from like producers and supervisors and stuff, when they tend to compare the two, there's usually not a lot of time savings in the first version of a model. It's every iteration after that that you get significantly speedier like returns on investment with proceduralism, because if someone was hand modeling this, you might get a version of a road in about the same amount of time, depending on the individual artists and their comfort with the software they're in. But it might be about the same. But then if you want to go, if you get a note that like says, hey, actually, they completely changed the layout of the road in this particular case, then, that depending on the tools you have, that might be very frustrating in Maya, but here it's just as simple as just rebuilding your curve.
Yeah, it seems like that part to me, especially in I guess, ever-changing feedback back and forth, going from the artists to the art directors to the directors back down the chain. It just seems like when it comes to stuff like this, it's created a lot more options for change on the fly, which would be much harder to do in a typical digital modeling program, like a Maya or Studio Max. And as much as Studio Max has some of a little bit of that functionality, I can easily see this just, once you've got all your controls built, Holy smokes.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely like, you can do a lot of this stuff, you know, in other software, but usually it's kind of workarounds or like extra features or scripting. You know, like I've definitely seen studios that have like Maya workflows that replicate this type of behavior. But it's kind of cheating it a little bit, because it like, you basically can go like I've seen a Maya setup that's actually pretty similar to this, and it lets you draw a curve, and then you press a button to like recook it. You know, you might change your settings, and then it like recalculates everything using scripting. But that's basically using Mel or Python to recreate what Houdini just is built into Houdini's DNA. Like, that's the coolest thing about Houdini, is all of this is just inherently built from the ground up to support this type of workflow. So you're not limited by, you know, needing to script or wait on certain things. You know, you can inject anything into this work. You know, I can go back at any point in my workflow and start, you know, I can go back and, you know, if my terrain changes, I could change that and then like reproject my curve onto that new terrain. You know, things like, so if they start to add like hills or things that weren't there, you don't necessarily need to start from scratch. You just say, okay, we'll take that road we drew and like, you know, shift it up so it aligns with that new ground plane, and everything else stays the same.
It seems like when you're first starting, I guess, you know, there was this, Casper B had a question. It says, first one, he says, it seems like you have a great knowledge of all the possible nodes. You know, I guess, you know, that ramp up in terms of understanding what's underneath the hood of Houdini, is that like some of the biggest sort of challenges? Like, it's so powerful, but you really have to kind of understand the capability of the node and the functions to be able to create that. Like, in other words, that front loading, like, you don't know what your options are when you're a beginner. So how do you kind of, what's a good way to practice to get to that place? Just a lot of trial and error.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things where like, you're not going to know what's available until you do it. Because if you hit this tab menu here, if we just look at all the nodes, you know, you can see there's a lot here. And even me, like, you know, we have our weekly live Q&A, small plug for the class. You know, for the class, we get, there's a 1 hour a week that's live interactive Q&A time with the students. And even just the other day, I was like, I knew the node I wanted. I knew what it was, but I just could not, like, they didn't name it the way that my brain thought it should be named. And I was like, what is the name of that node? And that'll happen occasionally, and usually just a quick Google search will solve it. But yeah, like it's kind of one of those things where it's just the best way to learn is, you know, kind of just using this, even if you don't understand the nodes, just using some of the nodes. And so either, you know, following tutorials, I'm a very like example-based person. So when I like to learn stuff, I like to try to find example files on online forums and download them and kind of pick through and see. And sometimes I'll download an example of something and they'll have done it like 90% similar to what I would have done, but there'll be a node that I've never really used before. And it might be a very old node that's been in there for a long time, but I've just never crossed paths with it. And I'll see it and be like, oh, that's really cool. I didn't know that that node was available. Because there's no course you take is going to say, hey, here's an introduction to every single node in Houdini. And so, and that's something kind of interesting too, is because Houdini is such a sandbox to allow you to do things however you want to do them, you could task the exact same task to 10 different Houdini artists, and they might get results that look exactly the same, but have done it 10 different ways, because they just, you know, people will tend to like, people know the workflows that they kind of learned when they were first starting out, and then those become kind of their favorite workflows. And then you add on to those, but no one's toolkit looks exactly the same in Houdini. Everyone kind of has slightly different tips and tricks that they've learned along the way, which is why collaborating in a department with other Houdini people can be a lot of fun. Because even if you both have 20 years of experience, you might sit down with someone and be like, oh, did you know that there's just this very simple like Python function or node or you know, tool shelf thing or whatever that does this thing that you're scripting? Like, oh, I had no idea. You know, that happens all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I figured. Let's go see if we got any. We're starting to get some questions that are being prompted here. Let me go ahead and see what we got going. You know, right. And keep going, by the way, with your demonstration.
Okay, yeah, here. I just have like one more little thing I wanted to show that is kind of another really cool demonstration of something you can do proceduralism. And this one is slightly more advanced, but it's not too terrible. So I'm not going to walk through the building of this telephone pole because it's very similar to what we did with the street light. I procedurally linked some things on here, just built a simple little thing. The only thing that's different here is actually here. You know what? Let's hold off on that for now. Let's go ahead and very quickly. Let's do the same thing. So I'm gonna you can kind of make any window big here in Houdini. So I'm gonna make the node network big here for a second so I can see what I'm working with. And what I want to do is I want to create another curve with extra detail or with points that I'm going to copy to, just like we did with the street lamp. But I want it to be on the other side of the road. Let's say one side of the road we want street lamps, the other side I want telephone poles. So I'm going to take just this whole little setup between the orientation and the copy to points. And I'm just going to copy and paste it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's take a look at it again. So this is where I ended up with my first curve that we used for the telephone poles, or not the telephones, for the light poles. I want a curve on the other side. So for this peak, I'm going to negate the distance that it moves, that. And then I'm going to make sure that the peak here is a little negative as well. So it's something like that. And then let's make sure my normals are facing the way I want them to. And then we have another resample. Okay, cool. So I'm going to do exactly what we just did. We're going to do another copy to points. I'm just going to copy and paste so that we save a little bit of time. And then I'll connect this here. So this is going to look very similar to what we just did. But we're going to do one cool thing here. We're going to go in and we're going to procedurally build cables between each thing. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to draw a line between each of these little discs here on top. And I need to tell it where on each telephone pole my start point is and where the end point is. So I'm going to just add some points in. And I kind of already set that up. I won't walk through like how I set it up. But basically, all I really did here is just kind of I procedurally kind of figured, it's similar to how I did the point for the copying the sphere. I kind of just, got the primitives that I wanted to add points to on here and then extracted the centroids of them and then added points. But you can see, I don't know if you can see them super well. Here, I'll do it here. So you can see, like I have these points, which are just kind of free floating points that are being carried along with this model. And so now when I copy everything, those get copied along. I also set up groups so that 2 of the points are in a group called left points and 2 of the points are in a group called right points. And so what I'm going to do here, and this one is more an example of what you can do in Houdini, not necessarily how to do it. So this is just kind of showing you, hey, look, isn't it cool that you can do this? Because I'm going to whip through this really quickly just as kind of a demonstration. So I'm going to give myself a little bit more screen real estate. So I'm going to just start with one of those set of points. So I'm going to start with the left points, we'll say. So I can tell it I only, after I copy everything, I only want to, what's going on here? Yeah, 2 points. My viewport hung. Oh, delete non-selected. Sorry, I just needed to make sure that I'm only, I'm deleting everything except those points. And then for each of those, what I can do is I can use this node called an add node. And on here, this is a good example of some of the powerful things in Houdini kind of being tucked away, and you don't necessarily know about them unless you just kind of know that this is a feature, because buried on this node, there's an option to create a curve out of points that you input here. And what I want to do is I want to, instead of connecting everything, I don't want there to be a cable on the small pieces, right? Because that's where the disk is. So instead of it being every single piece, I'm going to say group of endpoints. I'm going to say group of every 2 points. And this isn't quite what I want because it's starting from that first point. If I look up here and I look at my point numbers, starts from the other side, I can see I have 0, and 1 here. I'm never going to connect anything to 0 because there's nothing on this side of it. So I'm just going to drop down another last node. Whoops. Last node, delete that, that point. Make sure we get rid of that. And now if I connect them, now each of them has a curve between them. This obviously isn't super interesting though. So let's add some droop to it. So what I'm going to do is right now, each of these is a unique curve that has a start and end point, right? But they only have 2 points, just that start and end point. So I'm going to drop down a resample just to give it a little bit more resolution. Sure, that's fine. And then I'm going to use a point VOP, which is a little bit more advanced if you're not super comfortable with Houdini, but we'll kind of show like what you can do. And what I want to do is I want to tell it, I want to modify the Y position of this curve based on how far along the curve it is. So I need a value for each curve. I basically want this to get an attribute value of 0 and this to get an attribute value of 1 and everything else to be interpolated in between. And I can do that actually directly on the resample. There's this toggle here for curve U attribute. So if we visualize this attribute real quick, I think there's not a space or an underscore. Yeah, curve U, and it is a marker. So you can see that on every single curve, it goes from 0 up to 1, right? Rather than it kind of going across all the curves, it's per curve. And now I'm going to put down a point VOP, and I'm going to say using that attribute I just made, let's put it into a ramp so that we can kind of artistically control what that looks like. And then we're going to create another parameter here that's going to control the amplitude of this. And again, I apologize, I'm kind of whipping through this. This is, again, just meant to kind of be an example of some of the things that you can start to create once you're kind of more familiar with some of the more advanced workflows here. And then, so what I'm going to do here is I want to, I'm doing a ramp that's going to control like what the shape of the droop is. A multiplier is going to control how deep that droop is. And I want to make sure it's only affecting the Y position of these curves. So I'm going to pipe that into a vector, but only in the Y. And then I'm just going to, I'm going to subtract that from the position so that the Y value gets subtracted from all of the positions here. And so now I can go here and I have this ramp here that's not currently doing anything, but let me set this to B-spline, and did I output that to the right? Oh, and then the amplitude is at 0. There we go. So now I have this control here that controls the depth of that droop. And then I can also kind of artistically control like how I want that droop to look. By default, you could just kind of do something, you know, like this, just give it a nice natural look. But if you had, you know, if you wanted it to kind of be tighter on the sides or something like that, you've got a control right here to go ahead and control that. And then we can just do a simple like polywire to give that a little bit of actual geometry there, something like that. It's probably too thick, something like that. And then of course we could go through and we could do the same thing on the other side as well. But let's assume that we just like this one. Again, just to demonstrate, and we've seen it a couple of times now, but this is the super cool part of the process, is this is now just automatically done no matter how you modify your curves. So we have telephone poles being automatically generated with curves being, or the cables being generated between them. And then you also have streetlights, and then, oh, I need to stop moving in Y. And then you have your road being created. And this is all, you know, just once you have this done, you just have a setup to create this stuff. You know, there's no limits on kind of the road that you create at this point.
Yeah, and that other cable probably just goes on just, you know, pretty easy because you did it the first time. So it's like just, yeah, just an,
yeah, I mean,
that would be an offset, it seems like, or some
Yeah, well, actually, what we can do, I can actually do it. It's a very quick addition just to kind of demonstrate it, because each of these will have their own attributes. You can actually pipe them into the same workflow here. So what I'm going to do here is just kind of do this same thing like this, and copy it. But instead of isolating the left points, I'm going to isolate the right points. And then before that resample, I can just merge that in.
Wow.
And bam, I've got my other set right there. And then the only other thing I'd want to do is I'd want to get rid of my, you can see the little white dots there. Those are just my extra free floating points. I only added those to be able to connect these wires. So I just want to make sure that I'm getting rid of those, which, did I do that right? Should be doing it.
Yeah, that's like Houdini, and it's like the equivalent of a supercharged race car, going 0 to 60 and whatever, and the guy's still at the starting line. I mean, on that level of power and functionality, I mean, Houdini is definitely just kind of like, yeah, we could do this. I just imagine the amount of time it would have taken to do something similar in another package. And as much as I love, some of the attributes of the other packages, this is another league of being able to kind of do this kind of work. So we've been getting some questions along the way. I don't know if this is a good time for them.
Yeah, no, that's kind of everything I had in software planned. One thing before we jump into that, just to kind of piggyback off what you just said, that exact reason that you were talking about is actually one of the reasons that this is actually also very heavily used in environmental work. That's kind of been a lot of my exposure to it. And that's because if you think about it, not just in a per like scene or per shot, but actually across like a sequence and a whole like show or movie, like if you have a show that's going to have a lot of highways and a lot of city streets, you only need to build this rule set once. And then for every single shot that you've got streets in, you just pipe in a curve and the work is done. So it's not even just for how big of a set can you make with it, it's how many different sets can you reuse this for too. And that's where this becomes very appealing for producers and people who want to shave off time and money, is you can just kind of create a single rule set that gets the look that they want. And then you still have those controls to where it's like, oh, in this shot, we need the wires to be drooping a little bit less because they go underneath it. And then bam, you've got the control right there. But you get like 90% of the way there right out of the gate.
Cool. Well, I mean, I think this is just amazing. I think it's just been really great to see this demonstration. And I wouldn't have been able to do, maybe I would have had a chance at modeling the light fixture, might have done the road, but once I was done and doing the changes afterwards, I would have been left in the dust. So this is definitely unbelievable. So let's go ahead and see where the questions are coming in. Let's see. There's a question from Lucas. He said, somebody who comes from a Substance and Unreal Engine background, is Houdini as powerful when it comes to shaders and materials as it is in terms of modeling? Okay.
I haven't had a whole lot of production experience with shaders and things in Houdini, but I have kind of in my personal projects a little bit. I do know, I mean, a lot, like the neat thing about Houdini is even if, here, I could actually even pull this back up for a quick second. Any context you're in, Houdini tries its best to kind of create like similar feeling environments. So like this is the material context. And if I put down like a material builder here, we can dive inside that. And you'll see this looks pretty similar to what we were doing with that VOP stuff I was doing, but this is a completely different context. This is for generating materials. You can see, it's got like, your diffuse, your opacity, things like that. And so it is very powerful in terms of integrating with Houdini, especially of, you can a lot of the things that you can procedurally do in the SOP context, you can also procedurally do in the material context. You can also tie those two things together very easily. You can send attributes that you're setting up in the geometry creation, and you can kind of know I'm going to rely on that when I'm setting up my procedural material. So I've done a little bit of, I don't know Unreal super well, so I can't do a direct one-to-one comparison. I haven't seen too many studios that use Houdini's built-in renderers as their primary renderer. People will use Mantra a lot for like effects, for just rendering like effects work and stuff, because it ties in very well with that. Although Redshift is becoming very popular for that now too. So that's not a definitive answer. I think yes, but with the caveat of like, it's also not necessarily being done super wide in the industry, I think, to use Mantra.
Cool. Thank you for answering that. I'm going to start. I have some questions I'm going to throw into the Q&A mix too. They're a mix of some technical, but then also some of your background. I mean, you know, I'm sure some of us would love to hear about your big break into the entertainment production industry. What was that like for you? What was your first, like, holy smokes, I'm in what I'm doing?
Yeah, it was a few different stages of it. The first thing I got out of school was an internship with Side Effects, which is the company that makes Houdini. And so the first thing that I made that was like seen by people and I got very excited about was an explosion, like a gas station explosion I did for their Houdini 12, I think, launch video, maybe was what I was doing at the time. And that was really cool because it was like, oh, you know, watching the Vimeo video, but like, look at all the people that watch this. And then while I was there, I did a little bit of freelance work for a commercial. And so that was the first like thing that was being sent out to the world and not just living online. And then, you know, pretty shortly after that was where I got my first job at Real Effects. And that was super cool. It was like the first project there was not anything that was like anything to write home about, but it was just very cool knowing like, oh, you know, like, yeah, like a huge amount of people are going to go see this. I'm glad that it wasn't a higher profile project because, you know, you learn a lot over your first couple projects. So it was kind of nice cutting my teeth on something a little bit more lower profile. But yeah, it was also fun. You know, like I remember that first project, there were, because it was a bit smaller of like the stakes were lower. It wasn't Star Wars, you know, it was just a random animated film. There was a lot more freedom there for them to be like, hey, just try a new way to like make this cool looking thing. And there was a lot of support there to kind of like be creative and try fun procedural ways. That was kind of my first foray into just trying to solve problems procedurally in the professional environment, you know.
Speaking of challenging projects, I mean, do you have, you know, any that you remember that, you know, might have been like what you would consider in this point in your career, some of your most challenging projects? What kind of obstacles did you run into? And any insight that you gained from that experience? I mean, sometimes it's a little trial by fire, depending on the project.
Yeah, I will say that hands down, the most challenging aspects, the challenging things that I've dealt with in the industry is dealing with clients. That's one of the nice things about like CG animation, like 3D animation. It's all in-house. You're only trying to satisfy like the director or the producers. But you know, when you work at a VFX studio, you don't own the content you're creating. So you work on stuff, you get it approved by your lead, you get it approved by, depending on how high profile it is, like the head of the studio. But then eventually it gets shown to the actual client, and then they're always going to have a note, regardless of how perfect it is. Like, so I've seen supervisors be like, you know, an artist will show them something like, oh yeah, I just need to clean up this one thing and then I think it's ready to go. And they'll be like, no, leave it in. That way they have a note to address, and then you'll fix it and then it'll be perfect and you won't have to do anything else.
Wow.
The most, so I have a couple, I'll try to keep them short, but I have a couple little stories. So do you know what ferrofluids are? Like that magnetic,
So some people do. I will admit that I'm not. But go ahead.
Yeah. Well, ferrofluids, they're like a liquid, but like they kind of react. Like if you've ever seen those weird things where people like put a magnet, like iron shavings, and you like put a magnet around, and it reacts like kind of piles on itself. You can pull up a video of it later. It's like FERRO, I think, or no, FERROUS. I'm letting slip my lack of knowing how to spell strange words. But ferrofluids, when I was doing VFX work, I think I had like 4 different clients who said they wanted that as reference, to the point where I was like, cool, I'm getting really good at ferrofluids. And every single one of them by the end of the project was like, no, actually, we decided that's not what we were thinking, something different. And so just make it ripples in a pond. So we spent like months working on this really cool like ferrofluid thing. And then they're like, actually, we just want ripples kind of going out from the center. And I was like, I mean, even outside of the fact that like we made this cool thing, it's like that would have taken a day, you know, and we spent months on it. And so just things like that, where like when you can see the problem coming, but the client won't listen, and then you're just like, well, I just have to do it. And then you spend months on it, and then they're like, no, actually, yeah, what you said 3 months ago is what we want. And yeah, client work can be very frustrating. It can be very cool because you work on very cool projects, but it can be very frustrating because they can be very irritating at times. So
just to extend on that, because what I'm hearing then is because there's different types of feedback when it comes to interacting, you know, with various people, you know, whether it's peers and colleagues, that's a different conversation. Whether it's your art director, that's a different conversation. Whether it's a showrunner, you know, or the producer, that's a different conversation, depending on it. So I guess, you know, maybe for our audience, you know, how has that prepared you to, you know, I guess, do your job in a way that meets the needs of all these different people? You know, sometimes you're doing what I hear, a little decoding.
Yeah. So depending on where you're at and how far you are along in your career, most likely you're going to start at the bottom of the totem pole. So everyone who gives you a note is going to take priority over what you think the best thing is. So you definitely need to set your ego aside when you're working on projects in the industry, because unless you're working at like a place that is hiring you because they want you to be super creative. And like I said, like my first job it was lower stakes. They let me be creative, but like, that doesn't mean I got to make decisions about what ended up on screen. I got to play, and then they got to say, okay, cool, but make it look more like this, right? Like it was ultimately their decision what got sent out the door. And where it gets a little hairy though, is there are layers of that. There are tiers of that, you know, like if you're an artist, you might have a lead on your project, and they are just another artist, but they're like more experienced, and they are kind of the first filter level. And then after them is probably, you know, depending on the project, maybe like the supervisor, and then like the CG supervisor or something. And then, you know, maybe there's more layers in there of like, maybe, you know, sometimes the studio I was at, the head of the studio would like to look at things before it went out to clients, but if it was really high profile work. So that might be an extra level. And then the client. And it's kind of the weird thing about like taking notes is everyone supersedes you, and then everyone above the previous people supersede them. So you might get a note from this person that then is superseded by this person. And then this person might come in and agree with, you know, this person. And then this person might agree with the first version of your notes, and you just kind of have to go with it. And that's where it's like saving versions, and always like anytime you get a note, version up so you can go, because they might say like, actually, we liked what you had 5 versions ago. Can you go back to that? And you want to make sure you have that saved. But depending on like the VFX work I was in was very linear. I never showed it to one person until the previous person had seen it and approved it. And so in that case, you kind of just have to do it, and you kind of just have to trust that they know better than you. But sometimes there is a little bit of, you can kind of make your best guess, right? Like, so one example that happened with me is I was working on, this was on a CG and a 3D animated film. And there was this like kind of complex, not complex like work, but like there was this visual that they were just having a hard time getting to exist in 3D. It was like kind of this, they could explain it in 2D, but they were like, because the art directors on that were like very 2D people. And so they were like, we know what we want it to look like, but nothing that like we've handed to the hand modeling people has like worked in 3D. And so I was hearing what they wanted. And then I was hearing from my, the head of the whole department. He was like, cool, so here's how we're going to do it. This is what I think you should do. And I was kind of like, well, I think that this other way might solve it. And he was like, no, I want you to do this. And then I kind of just went and asked someone like, who needs to approve this? And they're like, oh, the art director. It's like, once you satisfy them, it moves on. So I was like, I'm pretty sure that like, I know what they want. So for the next round of notes, I did what I thought solved the problem. And then they were like, yeah, that's exactly it. Like you finally did it. And then the other guy was like, this is great work. Even though, you know, and so, but of course that could have bit me in, you know, that could have bit me in the butt too, if it didn't satisfy. And then the other guy would have been like, I told you not to do this. It was a little bit of a risk, but I just, you know, that was pretty far into my career at that point. I had confidence that I knew what they actually wanted. Because sometimes they'll say, like, sometimes you'll get notes that aren't actually directly the note that you need to solve, and you're trying to, like you said, like decode and interpret. So if they're like, you know, if they're saying like, hey, this isn't, if you have like an effect, say, they might be like, this is too slow. What they might mean is it feels slow. And maybe by adding more like debris trails on there, it feels faster or something like that, right? And that just kind of comes with time in the industry of like figuring out what, once you've gotten notes enough times, you kind of start to learn what people actually mean. So early on, don't try to just wildly guess what people think. But yeah, there is a bit of like kind of just having that experience and starting to learn like, what do you actually want though?
Okay. We've got a couple of questions more for you. So if that's okay, I know.
Yeah, no, let's keep going.
Taking the time for you. All right. This is more referencing the project you were just working on. Andrew S. Had asked the question of how would you move the curve up in the Y without affecting the light angle position? Say you have a hill on the terrain. I don't know if that's something that is too complex to get into in the scene, or if maybe is it a little bit more set up. If not, that's fine. But I just maybe using what you have, maybe there was a way to kind of, you know, show that. I'm not sure. Is that something that?
Yeah, we can dive into it. I will say that anything that I did not like plan ahead of time might get a little sloppy. We saw that pretty early on when I deviated from my gear setup. Because for me, a lot of my process is very kind of exploratory, and I'll usually know generally what I want to do, but I'll like kind of make some mistakes, and then I'll only show people like what I found out was the right solution. But let's dive in here real quick. So the neat thing about doing something like this is the orientation here is entirely controlled by those point attributes. So that normal we created is controlling the orientation of the direction that the light is facing. So if we modify the point position of that point, but we don't modify its normal, then we can move that point wherever we want and not reorient it. We did see it kind of happening and flip-flopping earlier because I was manually dragging the curve around, and that was kind of throwing some things off, but I think that's because of like where my normal calculations were. Let's go here. Let's try that and see if I can get it to work. So let's just take this up in Y. And so now everything's wonking out. So actually what I can do, I think an easy fix for this is to just go here before my copy to points. And I can just manually override my normal to always be, what would that be? That would be 0 in Y. So here we go. So I can just manually override that and say, hey, actually don't tilt it at all in Y. Like I want you to kind of update it in the other directions, but always make sure that it's flat in Y. Because like basically, because the Y component of that vector had any value other than 0, it started tilting that normal. But now it's gonna randomly, you know, well, not randomly, but it's gonna orient it based on the curve kind of going around that up, but it'll never kind of tilt. And so that's how we can get that.
Cool. That was actually simpler to do than I even expected. So pretty awesome. Not simple for me because I would need to get in there and learn all that, but in terms of getting into it in a couple of steps, holy smokes. I have a question for you. And obviously we're in the entertainment design business, and a lot of change can happen in this business. There's growth spurts in our business, and there's also times when the business can contract depending on, you know, economic forces beyond our control. All right. Have you ever been on the downside of a studio closing? Or a layoff, and how did you handle it? I mean, what are some feelings you had in hearing the news, and how did you kind of recover from that? You know, we're in a business that changes a lot, so maybe you have some insight to offer because, you know, having been through a couple of experiences like that, what should someone's expectations be entering our field?
Yeah, for sure. I have been on that side of it, and I will say that probably if you're in the industry for long enough, not definitely, but there's definitely a good chance that you will be, like this happened. I've been almost in the crosshairs of it a few different times, and then fairly recently was was at a studio that got shut down. So when I was at Real Effects, I left there after a few years. And I found out, I don't think it was right after I left, but it was like later in the year when I left, they had mass layoffs there. So I had already kind of moved on, but there were mass layoffs. They didn't shut down the studio, but they fired a whole bunch of people. They were scaling down very, very small. There, the writing was kind of on the wall. Like the reason I left was partially because they shifted me out of Houdini and they wanted me to start doing more procedural work in Maya, which I wasn't a fan of. But partially because work was very slow. Like there wasn't a lot for me to fill my time with during the day, and that was a pretty good indicator that they probably weren't going to keep everyone around for very long. Because it wasn't just me; it was huge swaths of people that just kind of didn't have a lot to do, and there was a lot of like, well, maybe we got stuff coming. They did salary freezes, but they were like, oh yeah, we have good things coming, but it's kind of you can kind of read into that of like things aren't great right now, and you want to be at a place that it gives you a bit more safety, and then when I was in Toronto, my studio was fine, but there was another studio that they came to work one day. They had no prior notice. They had projects in the works, and there was just a notice on the door of their building that said, we're shutting down. Sorry, you don't work here anymore. Like people walked to or came to work that day to find out. And they had like just hired people. People came from other parts of the world and immigrated into Canada to show up and find out that they didn't have a job. So that one was one of the more rough ones I've seen. One thing that I will say though, is one thing that was kind of a silver lining, well, not silver lining, but a neat thing to see in that terrible situation was all of the other studios like made room for they ramped up their hiring. They tried to take on as many people as they could because it's a very supportive community. Even though on a high level, you might work long hours and things like that. Like people are aware that it's a volatile industry, and a lot of people got snatched up by other studios and weren't without work for too long. And that also happened most recently. I was at Blue Sky, which was caught in kind of the crosshairs, and that was the first time that I was affected by it. And that was a victim of the Disney Fox merger. And so that one was also one where like the writing wasn't on the wall, but we weren't sure, right? Because no one really knew for sure whether Disney would want 3 animation studios, and we were definitely kind of we were definitely going to be pretty far below Pixar and Disney in terms of like we were a profitable studio. That was one thing that people were always optimistic about. It's like we've always turned a profit, which is not something all animation studios do. But at the same time, it's like, but Disney doesn't need another one. Like they make money. Like Disney prints money. Like they don't need that, right? So, and this is nothing against Disney. Like I have a lot of people who went from Disney. Disney was actually good about like scooping up a lot of people from Blue Sky when it was shut down. Disney and Pixar both. But that's kind of like the studios are separate than the corporate entity, right? Like it was not a studio level decision. It was a corporate level decision. Anyway, sorry, I'm derailing a little bit, but I think that in terms of mindset, I always knew it was kind of a possibility because of the peculiar situation we were in. Because I'd kind of heard with mergers, like if you're part of a merger, red flags should go up. I'd always heard that it's after a year or so that the merger closes where they make big sweeping things like that. Not always, but sometimes. Yeah. If work is really slow, if you're in a merger, anything like that, it's not a guarantee, but it's like maybe be aware. But I will just say like. It didn't really, it was sad because it was like, this huge part of the industry was shut down. It was sad it's sad to see that studio, regardless of how you feel about individual studios, projects and stuff, just someone who's built a legacy for themselves being shut down by forces outside of their control it's just a bummer. But in terms of like me individually, like it's kind of part of the industry, right? Like you kind of have to expect that any job you have might not be permanent, and at any point you can kind of be looking for work, and a lot of people do that full time where it's just contract work from place to place, especially in bigger cities, LA, Vancouver, Toronto, things like that. But yeah, I think you kind of always have to have a grain of salt at any place, no matter how comfortable you feel that like you might end up somewhere else eventually, and you might do everything completely perfectly. The studio might do everything completely perfectly, and just it just doesn't work out.
Yeah, and on that note, then I guess what I call bulletproofing or doing a little bit of shoring up of your skills. I mean, does knowing Houdini, as a very kind of featured program in the visual effects portion of the industry, is that a difference maker from a career perspective when it comes to a skill set that might be slightly more involved in terms of the training, the skill sets necessary to survive? Because, it is a step up, in my opinion, in terms of, what you need to do and know to do the kind of work you do.
Yeah. I think that, on a studio getting shut down scale, there's nothing you can do about that. Like if your studio goes under, everyone's going under. But yeah, that is an interesting question though, because throughout, I've kind of been fairly fortunate in my career in that I haven't really had a whole lot of like run of show contracts, like where I'm just on for like, like sometimes, I'll see that a lot with like animators and lighters and compositors, things where like they get maybe they're ramping up near the end of a project and they just need to bring on a bunch of people to pile through shots, and you're there for like a couple months and going in, so it's not like you're getting fired. You just get hired for a few months, and then they might decide not to renew your contract. There's nothing wrong with that. Like it just means they don't have use for that many people anymore. And then I will see people who get picked up, like the VFX house I was at, they kind of just ebbed and flowed. Like you didn't get tasked to a particular show. You just got, they just picked up a certain number of people based on how many total shows they had going, and you might be working on multiple shows at a time. But people would get let go when they needed to, thin out the numbers because things were slow. And I will say that other than the entire studio getting shut down with Blue Sky, I've been fortunate in that every single place I worked there until I decided I was ready to move on, even when I saw other people in my departments being let go. And in both of the places I worked before that, like the big studios I was at, I saw people coming and going and not getting their contracts renewed. And I think that, and like I'll be the first to admit, like I was on an effects team and I was by no means the best effects artist there. Like there were people who could blow me out of the water with their effects skills. But what I had was like this very procedural approach to things. So I got tasks that were kind of fell between the cracks of other things. So, it's not a water sim. It's not a fire or a smoke sim, but it's like, oh, we need, this thing to kind of procedurally do this, like that sword to like grow and be weird and things like that. And just having a really strong understanding of procedural fundamentals, I think was a certain amount of job security, because that's not something that everyone had. One thing that has, I think, kept me around places too, is I build a lot of tools for other artists to reuse. So even if I'm not doing the most impressive things with those tools, I'm like creating workflows and reusable things for other people to use. And that has also, I think, been a bit of job security.
So the shelf life of what you do has a lot more staying power. And that means something from a studio perspective when it comes to an investment in the kind of skills that you have. That's important to know, especially for people looking to do Houdini. I want to end because I just saw the time and we're past 1:33, at least on the East Coast time. I just want to say, first of all, thank you for the time. Are there any tips that you can sort of, I guess, give attendees, in terms of, how to maybe, approach learning Houdini, on a gradient level that makes sense, especially in the areas of procedural modeling? Anything you can kind of lend to, besides obviously looking at taking a course, anything that they might be able to do now proactively?
There's a lot of great free resources out there. I would say if you're an absolute beginner, let me see if I can pull this up. Side Effects actually has a really good set of tutorials on their website that's way more expansive than I think a lot of people realize. And there's some really good intros to procedural work on there here. Let me share my screen for a second, just so you can kind of see, because this is pretty cool. This is something I show in my class too, for like outside of class resources, just because again, I don't think everyone realizes this is here. So on the Side Effects website, you can kind of go just sideeffects.com/tutorials. You can kind of go and you can browse, you can filter by like what is the category you want, and then like what is your level here. So are you beginner, are you intermediate, are you advanced? So I can just say like, what's some beginner environment courses, right? And you can even say like, you know, is it film, TV, is it VR, is it games? And they might have things specific for that too. So if I look at like if I wanted to get in, if I was interested in procedural modeling, you can kind of just scroll through this and, you know, like maybe procedural tennis ball, maybe that'd be a pretty easy thing to start. I would just dive in. I mean, I would start with, I would definitely start with just some, you know, they probably have like a, I don't know what it would be under, but I'm sure they have like just an absolute intro to Houdini, learn your way around the software. I would definitely recommend that, because you got to wrap your head around like the differences in this software versus other softwares. But like one that I like, I don't know specifically I don't know that I've specifically done this tutorial, but this is a great like beginner thing that I've taught, is a picket fence. You know, that's just, you know, it's kind of similar to what we did here. It's curve based, but it gets you kind of not necessarily learning every single thing you'll do in procedural modeling, but it kind of teaches you how to use attributes and how to like kind of work in this procedural way. So that's something I like. But, you know, if you're interested in anything specific, I would like, Side Effects does a good job here. There's some other great resources out there too, but this is a great one.
So then on that note, because obviously there's, you know, resources like the Side Effects website, you know, third party, YouTube, etc. What is the benefit for students coming to your class then? Assuming that they've maybe ramped up looking at, you know, some of these videos and they're ready for the next level. What is the value of your feedback in the situation of this class that's going to be a difference maker? Because, you know, there's one thing to do tutorials, you know, on your own, and that's important part of the learning. But, you know, what do they get from working with you?
Yeah, I'll kind of list just like a few things that like kind of made me excited to teach, and kind of that made me excited to kind of share, you know, things that I've learned and things. One is that it's growing, but procedural environment and procedural modeling work is not super prevalent in the industry. So a lot of this stuff might be from the point of view of someone who's like an effects artist or things like that. And, you know, anything you learn in this class will be from the point of view who's, you know, worked with modeling departments and worked with, you know, environment department. Most of my work has been on environment departments, but, you know, as part of the environment department, like we work with modelers and things like that. So coming directly from the viewpoint of someone who's actually doing procedural work and not just loves Houdini and is kind of exploring it on their own. Also, something that like I've noticed some people do in the industry, but not as many as I would have expected. Just kind of will focus a bit on kind of how to build things that are very reusable. And I especially like to in the Q&A, depending on what the particular students are interested in. But when there's time and people are interested in it, I love to go through like how to kind of build these into really impressive reusable tools, how to build really cool like shelf tools to you know, speed up your workflows, how to kind of build custom like, you know, Vex or Python scripts if that's what you're interested in. And those are the kind of things that like really help people become power users in Houdini. And I've found that like, because procedural modeling and procedural environment work is something that is becoming more prevalent in Houdini, but is not necessarily super common, you sometimes kind of have to come up with like weird tricks to like get things done. And so there's certain things that we'll learn that like I personally haven't seen other people do. And so I think it's pretty cool because it's stuff that I've found over, you know, the course of my experience in the industry.
Wow. Well,
also, you can hear me ramble like I just did for an hour every week.
Hey, man, we appreciate it. By the way, guys, we've done more than we had talked about initially. So I'm going to ask you a little grace in going longer than we had talked about, first of all. So thank you so much for taking the time. You know, it's been amazing 90 minutes of inspiration and information. You know, we're so glad that you took the time out of your busy schedule to do this webinar. And so on behalf of CGMA, we just want to thank you for sharing all of that stuff related to procedural modeling and Houdini, some of your personal experiences, challenges in the industry, as well as how you've managed to become successful in being an example of someone who is using these amazing tool sets in an amazing way. To the attendees, I want to thank you guys for bringing your questions and your enthusiasm to the subject matter. You know, I know that there was a question about whether or not there was a way to contact Sean. I'm not sure if that's something you'd want to facilitate, but if not, maybe through LinkedIn. I don't know if that's possible.
Yeah, let's just go with that for now.
Yeah.
If there's anything you want to reach out to me, you can find me on LinkedIn.
Yeah, yeah, that's cool. And then, you know, just a reminder, guys, that, you know, in the chat area before, the first 10 students who attended this was a webinar, and you guys get a 5% discount for anyone interested in enrolling Sean's amazing class using the offer code I provided earlier in the chat. So it's that funky bunch of letter characters. Anyway,
so is that the first 10 people in the webinar, or the first 10 people who choose to use the code?
First 10 people who choose to use the code. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
So, and on behalf of CGMA, my name is Frank Cordero. This was Sean Mcewan, and it was a pleasure for us to host this webinar for you guys. Thanks a lot, guys. See you next time.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Hey, man, that was awesome. Great. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Is the webinar is wrapped up? Like it's just us?
Yeah. No, it's there are probably still people hanging out. So, but I'm gonna start powering down. But I just wanted to say thank you again personly. I really appreciate it. So super generous. I'll let you get back to stuff. And all right, guys.
Did we get a total attendee number? I never.
You know what? I can get those stats.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly where I can get those stats. Let me see if that's something. Yeah, I can get. Well, right now it's saying 57 attendees, but I think it was more in the beginning. So,
cool.
And we get some stats on that. So, all right. But I'll if you want that information, I can tell you. All right.
Yeah, I'll just be curious to know. Couldn't really tell. I had
all right, cool,
notes all over my screen.
Okay. Well, dude, man, I'm gonna let you get back to your life, and so great talking to you, man.
All right. Thanks.
All right, man. Thanks a lot, man. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Okay. All right.